to this session to SQL Server 2019 is not your daddy's database management system. Once again, my name is Armando Lacerda, and let's go ahead with some introductions, right? Some words about myself. So yeah, so I'm looking here at this side because I got two monitors. My VM is here, my slide deck is here. So I'm a senior BI and Azure architect. I work with Wintellect, and I'm part of the data platform team over there. I'm also a Microsoft MVP data platform. But yeah, I was awarded last year, so it's my first year and a half in the program. I hold multiple Microsoft certifications, and that's something I really enjoy sharing. And actually also get incentive to people to get certified, because it's a very building up process, and it builds you up in terms of your knowledge. You know, getting the certification itself, pass the exam, is just the cherry on top of the cake, you know, because you really the value of it is how much topics you have to go through and how much you have to learn in order to get ready for the exam. So it's pretty good. And yeah, I've been in love with data for about 30 years, a little bit over than 30 years. And that picture of me there, I'm gonna upload this slide deck, so you're gonna remember me. But as you can see, I look back better in the picture than on my camera. There is this website, you upload a picture, it makes it look like it was a paint, like an oil paint or something. So I like that particular one, so keep using it. All right, so the topic here, actually a lot of talks this event is about, a lot of the talks are about SQL Server 2019, and this one would not be different. But I want to point out to a particular change, because there are so many new things in SQL Server 2019. You know, we could spend the whole day here just enumerating them and give a brief description of each one of them. You know, trying to make sense of all those innovations they delivered. It was just it's just a great release, and it comes from me. Because I've been working with SQL Server on-premise for, since forever, since SQL Server 6.5. But for the past 5 or 6 years, I've been working with Azure a lot. And actually, I think the last application and the last project I have to get involved with using SQL Server on-premise was about 3 years ago. So why I'm so excited about SQL Server 2019? Because a lot of the things that I see in the cloud they made their way to on-premise. And regardless if you are really focused on the cloud, you really have fully on-premise support only if you run SQL Server on a VM in the cloud, or close to that if you do managed instance. And the amount of integration that came up and how they expand SQL Server for the on-premise footprint, it's just awesome. So the agenda for today, and then as you're gonna see that, Daddy would be really surprised when he would, if he had a chance to look at SQL Server 2019. It's pretty much about external data, right? In a SQL, we're gonna go over this one. That's the agenda. So 3 topics only. It should be fun as we move along. I would like to refer to SQL Server 2019 reviewed from Bob Ward. He presented earlier today. I think was one of the second second time slot of the day. I did not make it there. I was watching the other one from Synapse because I'm working a lot into big data and data warehousing and those things. But I highly recommend that book. I got that book from him in one of these conferences where we bumped together. He gave me a copy of the book. Here's my copy. He gave me a copy of the book. And highly recommend it. And if you get a chance to get your hand in this book, the content we'll be talking about here pretty much on chapters 10 and 11, chapters 10 and 11 on that book. And again, like I said, the main topic here will be about data access. How to get data access, and in particular, how to get access to external data from SQL Server. That's one of the things that really impressed me when I look into the architecture and the design of SQL Server 2019. So let's get to it. How SQL Server gets data. If you are here, if you are if you work with SQL Server at any capacity in terms of administration, you know that SQL Server stores its data into data files, right? So you see that this illustration is a very simple illustration, and it kind of depicts how SQL Server organizes the data when saving to the data files. We pretty much have two structures. We have what they call a file group, right? What you see in SQL Server as a file group is this blue box in here, and you can have multiple file groups if we want. And so a database is comprised by one or more file groups, and each file group will have one or more data files, right? So usually you have only one MDF. All the pictures I'm using here in my slide deck I stole from somebody else. So this one, funny enough, I got from Microsoft documentation. Just noticed they have two MDFs, which is not usual, right? We should not have that. But anyways, there is a data files, right? All these data files, and one of them is the master data file. Everybody has the secondary data files, and we have the transaction log. And if you want to deal with data, if you want a SQL Server to process your data, you would have to bring your data into those data files. So SQL Server was never able to actually dispatch queries in a way that it could integrate with the external or to the remote engine. So since SQL Server 2000, I think SQL Server 7.0 maybe, we have a bunch of a collection of support to collect data from external sources. But the bottom line is, if I really want the query processor to consider those external data coming into SQL Server in the plan, right? In the query plan, the data has to be brought into SQL Server, into the data files that we are seeing here, right? And with that support, the way that thing was designed, the options you have for that, a long time ago, I don't even have any slide for that, was like using BCP to get data in, and that's from the, the ancient history of SQL Server, although a lot of people still use BCP today. We get bulk insert command from the command line you can use. SQL CMD can be used for that. The most common ones I see out there when I'm talking to clients are one of these two in here, right? For ad hoc queries, when I need to go and let's pick up that Excel file, bring it to SQL Server, and I don't want to create an integration service package for that. I don't want to create the whole transformation thing, get another process going. I just want to point to that file, bring that file in, and if I need that file again, I'm gonna do a query to it. So it's ad hoc point in time stuff. So here's an example, right? This we could use this open row set function. You are probably familiar with this one here. It's a very simple one. You just define your query string, and your connection string and your query, and you would bring your data in. For more recurring data sources, external data sources that you would like to query more often, or your applications need to mix that data to generate the final results, you would probably resort to a linked service, right? This screenshot in here, to linked service. And the idea of the linked service is this whole configuration there about the connections kind of stored in the server configuration. And as we need, we just bring the data in. So I got a demo on that one. Let's double check, just refresh our memories about how those things work. So let me switch here from the slide deck to the virtual machine. If I can find the virtual machine. There it is. There we go. Too many browsers open. So here's my virtual machine. And yeah, so this is the, by the way, what I'm running here is I have a virtual machine in Azure running SQL Server 2019 with the latest updates. I think if I do here a select at version You can see that, there we are. I just ran the updates this morning, right? So I'm running SQL Server 2019 with the latest updates. And I also have in Azure, let me jump here into the Azure portal just quick. Let's go back in here, portal.azure.com, there we are. And here in Azure, what I have for us to have fun today is a resource group with a storage account in there, a storage account in there with a file that we're gonna bring in later using the new resources in SQL Server 2019. So here I got my file in here. So we got this file, and we also got this SQL Saturday, there it is. We also got this Cosmos DB with MongoDB API support level on it. We're gonna actually, it's here already. We're gonna work with these documents here and get these documents also in SQL Server. So this is what we are running on. I also have a SQL Server PaaS offering, Azure SQL Database, that is running on this subscription too. So if I go around here, this one, which is an instance of Stack Overflow. It's kind of an old one, it's over a year old. You probably know that Stack Overflow, they publish their database with all the questions, everything as a SQL database that you can bring in, and you can use as sample database like I'm using here now. So it's all licensed. I didn't steal anything from anybody. So this database is running there, and if I go down here, you see I have 420 gigabytes of data, and this is one of the databases we're also going to be querying. Actually, this one is the one I'm going to be querying right now using the old format, the old style. So as you can see here, we're going to query Azure SQL Database, and this is the connection string over there. I'm not going to browse all the way to the end because the password is there. The bad thing about this one here, one of the things that's bad about this is if you don't use trusted connection, you have to hard code your credentials in there, and that looks bad, right? But anyways, it works. If I run my query here, it will make the connection from my virtual machine to Azure SQL Database, asks the database to run the query at its site, grab all the data in, and just bring the data into my database. So if I am to, for instance, if I am to do a join with this table here, with this result, with another table, the query processor would have no way to figure out what kind of data and the volume of data that would be coming right from the external source, because it's ad hoc query. Just hit it there, bring the data, and bring it back in. The bottom line is SQL Server would have a hard, if this table was a big table and was in a join with other larger tables, SQL Server would have a hard time to create an optimized query plan for this one here, because it has no idea of the data that's coming down and the distributions, no statistics, right, on this one here. And you cannot create any statistics for an open row set. In the same way, if I go here, did I change anything? I think I did not change anything. So in the same way, I can do something similar, right? When I do linked server. So if I go here into linked server, I think we can see the object in here. Let me see, this is the database, server objects. And here in the server objects, as you can see, I have my SQL database in there. And it's the same database. So kind of the same query is gonna work in here. And it's pointing, funny stuff. It doesn't show the data that I put in there. And I put the credentials, right? One credential for everybody to keep things simple. In any case, I just execute my query here, and something very similar to the other to the open row set happens. I got my data in. This one looks more natural, but still the same problems persist, right? This query goes out to a remote server. That SQL Server just waits for the results. It doesn't know anything else about the server. It could be an Oracle database. It could be a bunch of other databases in there, and database engines. And then when data comes in, SQL Server just nested loops in case of joins or whatever it is. The query plan is not just optimized for this, because there is no support for any optimization using these two resources. And the funny thing is, this is what you see mostly out there when people need to do these external data connections. What came along in SQL Server 2019 is something pretty interesting. Let me switch back to my PowerPoint slide deck. Here it is. Yeah, so what came along with SQL Server 2019 is something pretty interesting. But to understand what came in there, we have to step back in history a little bit and look at SQL Server 2016, right? All on-premise, nothing on the cloud, SQL Server 2016. So in SQL Server 2016, this new service, supporting service, was added to SQL Server. And it's important to understand this one here because it changed the game a little bit. You know, throughout SQL Server history, a lot of extra services were added to process data outside the data engine. So, you know, SQL Server had SQL Server agent for forever. It's always been there. But then you got analysis service added to the package. So when you like buy a license, you get this analysis service in there. When you buy a license, you also get integration service in there. Down the road, analysis service became start supporting two models, right? The traditional multidimensional and the tabular. So a lot of things kept being added to SQL Server. You know, you have master data service, you have data quality service. A lot of extra things they started adding to SQL Server, but nothing actually changed how SQL Server dealt with the data. These are all external process. There was the all external process to deal with other sorts of data processing or data pipelines, not actually the query thing we're just considering here. When Polybase came along, it was an interesting addition because it looked into the problem that people had a lot of data outside SQL that they want to have mixed up, you know, be able to query together with the data that was in SQL. And because usually that data was a volume data, you know, gigabytes, perhaps terabytes of data that were deployed on premise more likely back then. Microsoft came along and released this service called the Polybase. And a lot of people look at Polybase and they're like, what is that? What is it for? What does it work? When you go around, you don't see it installed in many places because it has a lot of dependencies outside the Microsoft realm, if you may, which is in Java. There is some Java installations you have to do. Get Polybase to work in SQL Server 2016 was a little bit cumbersome, but of course you can make it to work. And this was the diagram that was popular back then in 2016, 2017, kind of in an angle, right, to demonstrate, to try to convey the idea of what the thing is all about. And as you can see in this diagram, what we have in here is the ability. Here's my mouse. Let me see if this thing. Can you see my mouse? I'm not sure if you can see my mouse. Can you see my mouse when I move it over?
Yes. Yes.
All right. Cool.
I can see it.
Good to know.
Thanks.
So, oops, go back one. So this should work. Now I really feel like I am in the in a room, physical room, right? To use a clicker to show stuff. So screen sharing is now paused. Another Windows on top of it. Oh, it didn't like go to web conference, did not like this. So let's use the mouse. Okay, anyway, so what we have in here is SQL Server, right? It's SQL Server running on premises in here, SQL Server running on premise. And again, the subject, the context is still the same. We have SQL Server running on premise, and we need to access data that is also on premise. And you know, the big thing, the big you know, the new guy on the block and all the attentions back then in 2016, like almost 5 years ago, was the Hadoop data, right? We get a lot of people get the big data implementation, get Hadoop going on, and there are terabytes and terabytes of data in this Hadoop thing, and I need to get portions of that data inside SQL Server. So again, Microsoft came up with the Polybase, and what you're supposed to do is to set up Polybase to have access to this external data, but in a particular in a particular approach. And the approach is, it's very important here, is the scalability. One of the problems with the two ones, I'm going to flip back a couple slides in here. Go back. Come on, help me out. Go back. There we go. One of the problems with these two guys in here, besides not being able to predict the data, the volume of data that was coming down the pipe, it's also, it doesn't scale, right? It's a single thread. It opens a connection to the external source, pulls the data in, and it may even take a while to get that data in because it has to authenticate and all of that. So this one here, these two, they don't scale. That's why Polybase came along. Polybase came along because besides being able to connect to places where those two were not able to, it also implements MPP, right? It can do things in parallel in a massive way, right? The way they say it. So we can really bring a lot of data into SQL Server and leveraging the actual data engine on the external database. So any kind of aggregations, anything you want to do, you leverage over there. You can bring that data in, but some of the issues would still, no. Yeah, in this case, you could have a technique to implement a prediction of what kind of data would come. And you're going to see how that works in a bit. The other thing that Polybase brought in back in 2016 was the ability to query from blob storage up in the cloud. See Azure here. So it's a very hybrid environment, on-premise and Azure. And the only thing that Polybase was able to do is to bring data from blob storage up in the cloud. Over time, these things expand a little bit, but that was the basic idea of Polybase back in 2016. And the big deal here was the ability to read from Hadoop in a parallel way, so we could get performance. It would scale, right, if you have the right hardware and the right configuration. What came along with SQL Server 2019 is this idea of data virtualization. And I'm going to tell you, I was watching the presentation from, I think, 2 hours ago on Azure SQL Database from this lady from Microsoft. If I have the schedule here, I could tell you the name. I'm horrible with names. But, and she was like, I don't like the way Microsoft name things. Sometimes it's confusing. And I couldn't agree more, right? Like Synapse, you know, I'm a data platform guy. I work with large data use cases. And when Microsoft came along with Synapse back in Ignite last year, I was like, where this name comes from? You know, where did you brought it from? And of course, I started doing a little research, and you know better than I do. You know that synapse is when a nerve cell sends data to or information to the next nerve cell. Is the data transmission in between the nerve cells. And of course, that makes perfect sense. Now I love the name. But data virtualization, or the name virtualization, it's kind of a, you know, very overloaded. You know, virtualization can be so many things. What do they mean by data virtualization? Again, one of those things, and when I read the first, it doesn't make much sense to me. It's kind of, you know, when you talk container, you know, you talk about container. If it's Azure, you could be like a container in a storage. It could be a container like Azure Container Service, or one of the container templates for Kubernetes. It could be Cosmos DB and a container inside Cosmos DB. You know, this name I think is really crazy. For data virtualization, what they're talking about here is not container, not VMs, not any sort of virtualization. The whole idea here is, and this is the really point I really want you to get from this presentation. The whole idea here is SQL Server 2019 on-premise will be able to work with your data regardless where your data is, and you can tell SQL Server what to expect, so query plans can be optimized query plans for your external data sources. So it's not just Hadoop on-premise or blob storage anymore. It's actually a collection of data sources you can have just out of the box. There are a bunch of them. And the idea is to implement something like this. So what you have in here is you have your SQL Server installation. This is your SQL Server. Well, this icon here is about, your SQL installation is over here, right? It's up top. And this will be your SQL Server on-premise. So this icon here is about SQL Server Azure SQL Database. So sorry about the bad icon in there. I'm gonna change it later. This is supposed to be about SQL Server on-premise. So we have SQL Server on-premise here. It's running SQL Server 2019, and someone sends a query, right? And that query will collect data not just from on-premise data that you have in your file groups and your data files, you have organized it internally, but it will bring data from a variety of data sources that are out there, regardless if they are on-premise or in the cloud. You just set up Polybase, so the underlying technology is still the same, Polybase. You just set up Polybase, and you set up all these elements, all the necessary elements to collect the data from, and you use SQL Server resources to probe the data from the external sources. You use SQL Server resources to probe data from the external resources, and that's the big deal. You know, probe the data in SQL Server. You probably know that it's called statistics. When you create a table and the table doesn't have statistics, SQL Server, the query processor cannot create good query plans because SQL Server doesn't know what kind of data to deal with. So statistics, they are, you know, the soul of good query plans, right? They're the soul of good query plans. Without statistics, the query processor really can't do much. And the whole idea here is be able to connect to these external sources and tell SQL Server, look, go there, talk to the guys, to the external data engines, learn about the data and store the statistics internally. So when we run these queries, they will run outside. We know what to expect and we know what kind of joins we should be getting, we should be creating, right, when we read the data from these sources. And yeah, and the process of creating this, and it's what I'm going to be demo next. The process of creating this, it's these steps in here, right? It's just a few steps. Actually, you know, it can be more databases, as you can see here. It's just this slide is going to be too busy if I put all of them in there. But the idea is this one, right? You set up Polybase. The first thing is make sure that you have Polybase set up and with the right permissions inside your on-premise SQL Server. In my case here, like I said, I'm running on a VM in the cloud just because I have more resources there in the cloud, but you know, could be on-premise. So in your on-premise, and then you set up all the authentications that are needed. They're gonna go over the code with you. All of this is very well documented. I wrote minimal code in here, copied most of the code from the documentation from docs or Microsoft.com. And I'm going to rebuild the code with you guys. But that's the idea. You set up the authentication and the data source. If, depending on the data source, if the data source, if Polybase support external formats for that data source, predefined data sources, you can set that up and create the external table. And here's the point. You're right. You create statistics on this data you have just get connected to. And then you're going to do happy queries, right? Queries that should perform pretty well on external data sources. So let's take a look on those things. Let me go back to the virtual machine and let's take a look on those things in there. By the way, guys, this is the first time I'm running this particular presentation. It's brand new. So thank you for be attending it, and all the feedback you can give me later after the session is going to be very welcomed. Gotta love too many windows opening here. Oh, this is all about authentication. That's why I'm here, because I need to show you this. So if when you go into SQL Server, if you have SQL Server 2019 already installed and you don't know if you know your Polybase is already there, what you got to do is run the setup tool again from SQL Server. Come on, so, run the setup tool again, and then you can check it in here. Like this particular one, when I set up this VM here, Polybase was not there. So I had to come in here and do the same thing. You know, go through the steps in here and check it out, and then enable it. So when it came to here, my instance is already there, and I want to just check if Polybase is there. I know it's there, but I want to show you this. So Polybase is there, right? I have already installed, but when I was prepping for this presentation, it was not. So I set it up. You know, just click on these guys here and followed along. And what ended up happening is because SQL Server was already installed, the credentials that were given to Polybase after the installation of SQL Server, after SQL Server has been already installed, did not work. You know, I tried to run the code and everything, and I have to troubleshoot stuff because it did not work. So I want to save you some time. After installation, you may want to come into the services if you are not installing Polybase with SQL Server on the first shot, right? You may want to come here into the Polybase services, and you want to change the logon account for these guys. The one that comes in there fails miserably, and I'm looking at the right thing. Yes, fails miserably. And then I have to come here and add an account that was really an administrative account with permissions inside the database, inside the instance, and then it got it to work. But if you do it out of the bat, brand new installation of SQL Server, that's not necessary. That would work just fine. All right, so that's the first thing. And like I showed you on the slide, right, is this the first one, set up Polybase. Once that is ready, the next thing you got to do for Polybase, let me close this one here and go back to Management Studio. Once that is ready, you have to enable Polybase, and I think I did not save that script, so I'm gonna write it here just quick. You gotta do sp configure, and I think it's something like Polybase enabled. Is this one? Whoops, where this one came from? Yeah, so Polybase enabled, right? And of course it has to be 1. Even after installation, it can come like 0 first. It was 0 for me because I enabled it after installation. So you have to make sure that this one here is set to 1. So these are the first these 2 steps here, the first 2 steps for Polybase to work on your on-premise environment. After that, like if you have ever stored made a backup to the cloud using SQL backup and pointing to a blob storage in the cloud, you know that every time in SQL Server you have to save credentials somewhere, you do have to encrypt those credentials for security, right? You have to keep security standards. So if it's the very first time you are setting up any kind of a credential inside SQL Server on your on-premise server, the very first thing you got to do, and of course it did not save my code. The very first thing you got to do is create a master database encryption. You got to do, this guy here, and create an encryption key that will be used by SQL Server internally to encrypt every other credentials you come to create. So the next step here, like this one here, is for Blob. So to connect to this Blob in here, I will have to create a credential. In order to create a credential, the first step is to create a master database encryption key. If this one is not there, SQL Server will not save the credential, will not allow you to do the credential. And the idea, like I said, is SQL Server wants to encrypt this thing here, so people would not be able to see or recover this outside the environment, right? It's not just plain text or a regular table that people would be able to see. So I'm in the second step, right, for authentication, because I have created a master key once. Let me drop these guys here to create them again so you can see. I probably in the wrong database, so master database doesn't support these things. You have to be in a user database. So there you go. Now they're gone. So the next thing here is to go ahead into Azure and collect shared access signature, right? This guy here says a shared access signature. Just in case if you're not that familiar with that, you have a storage account someplace. You create a storage account for that, and you will come here into the shared access signature right here, and set up the permissions you need to have. Read is the minimum one. You gotta have read. Here you go, read, right, in order to read from the blob storage. So we set this up, and when you ask to generate, where is it? Huh. Supposed to be a button here. Oh, there we go. It's so dark, I almost didn't see it. So there's this button here. Well, come on, give me access to my things. Oh, thank you. There you go. That's the way it's supposed to be, blue. And you get this shared token here. You're gonna find this everywhere in the documentation out there. When you copy this signature, don't forget to remove this question mark from the leading question mark in here from the beginning, because that breaks the thing. If that thing is there, it will not work later. So there we go. I removed from this one here. And when I do this, I have access, set up the credentials to get access to the blob storage. And when I do this one here, I'm telling SQL Server where is the storage account, right? The name of the storage account. And as you can see, they are linked together, right? LA blob storage. So we got these two guys there. And something always goes wrong in live demos. There we go. So create it. And then we go into the external table. So for blobs in particular, when SQL Server 2019 is working with blobs, because blobs know CSV files, see I have a dimension customer CSV file over there. For CSV files, because there is no data engine out there, your best route is actually bringing it into SQL Server, right? So if this thing is that big, you want to bring it to SQL Server in order to do that. That is when you do Synapse, Synapse SQL Analytics, you can do CTES to run these things, but in SQL Server 2019, there's not much support for that yet. So there we go, right? You create a table inside SQL Server. I think I have already created this table. Oh, just created. There we go. And then you can bring your data in when you run this one. So as you can see, this would replace, right, your either the open row set or your linked server. And the beauty about this one here is if you dump more data in that blob storage, you just have to go to this, since everything is already set up, you just have to go to this one here and bring the new data in, right? So no need for round trips to SSIS, no needs to get new file names. For instance, I could be reading here just from the folder, and I would be getting all the files that are in the folder. Of course, the files, they should conform in the structure, right? All the collections of files in there, but I would be bringing them all together, which is pretty fun, right? Because once set up, is set up once, used forever. That's pretty interesting. With that in mind, what are your questions? I think you can see the questions in here, right?
Hi, yeah, I'm looking at questions and I don't see any.
You don't see any? Okay.
No questions. You're doing so great. There's nothing to ask. You're covering everything. It's actually really interesting because we were looking into this at my job, and it's really nice to see it in action. I'm really enjoying it, although no questions.
All right, cool. Yeah, I don't think I'm presenting that well. I think people are just asleep, after lunch, something like that, and they're gonna probably watch this one later. But thank you, though. I appreciate the moral support. All right, so that's the one for. Let me check this back here to this guy. Save these things. So that's the one for blob storage. What if I do Cosmos DB, for instance? Oh no. Didn't save my script. So what if I do Cosmos DB, for instance? If I am to support Cosmos DB for query, I more likely have my my thinking here where I was working on this thing. Hold on. Let me see if I can find it just quick. Because I was running this on another machine outside the, there it is. The VM for demos, because I didn't want to break anything. And here we go. Get this guy here. So let's do it on the fly. Since I blocked, see, I had the file here. I thought I saved it, but I did not. So let's get this guy here. Let's call it, this one is SQL Saturday LA, right? Data source. So this is the data source. And I'm gonna go and get my my credentials from the Cosmos portal. Let's go ahead and get it there just quick. That shouldn't take long. Let's go back in here and let's take a look at the connection strings. So this is my username. It's right here. And don't have funny ideas, right? I'm gonna drop this thing here just after my thing. So don't think about spending my dollars there. So this is my username, and this is the hash key from the portal. Let's grab the hash key here. There it is. My hash key. So that should take care of this. Execute. Database credentials are not supported because I'm in master. See, you cannot do anything in master. You have to switch the other one. Let's run. There we go. That works. So that takes care of the credentials to get to the database, and this one here will take care of getting to my container in there. So if I go back to this guy here, I will see my URL right here. Control C, I've copied already. There we go. And let's get this guy here on the URL. And for the port that was associated, this one is this guy here. It's there. So let's copy it and get it to my script. There it is. And this is the name of my credentials. So let's get the name of my credentials over here. And this one here, see if I go back here to the portal in Data Explorer, you see I brought in some data here about one of the tables that there are in worldwide import. It's about customers, dimension customers. I hope that it is still there because I did save it. There it is. Yes. So I still have a document in there for this container, right? For the DIN customer. This is my guy, SQL Saturday LA 2020, and my my container. That's the name of it, container. So let's get back in here, and this is my guy. So this is external data source. Dimension, actually, yeah, oh, this is it. The external data source, and my name, the name of my guy here will be SQL Saturday LA external source. So those are the credentials. These are the source. And there we go. Created. That easy. You know, if there's something wrong in here, unless if it's a syntax error, it will not tell you right away. It will save it for later when you really try to query something. So don't get too fancy, like, oh wow, got it right. You may not have it right. You will fail later. And for our table in here, because that document in there is from this table here. Where is it? This is Azure SQL database. This is my database in here, and this is my customer, dimension customer. This is the guy. So I'm going to script this table here as a create table into the clipboard and get this guy here. I'm going to strip out the things I don't need. Don't need any of this. What I need is just the table name. And I think I have created here a schema called Cosmos DB. Let me double check that. It should be there. Security, schemas. Let's see here. There we go. Cosmos DB is created there. So I have it here. Cosmos DB, and I'm going to create a table on that one. But here's the trick. It's not just a table. It is a external table. That's the trick here, because I have all the settings for the connection to the remote storage ready, right? So this is my external table. And because I'm working with MongoDB, you have to understand the specifics of the database or the external source you are working with. Mongo add this ID there. It's let's double check if it's there. Get back in here. You see this ID here? See, when I add my documents, I have just this data here, but Mongo add this guy, right? This particular ID. So this is the one I'm adding to my schema. It was not originally in the table, but I'm gonna add it here. So it's gonna be an nvarchar of 100. Gotta be there. And everything else is from the table. Customer, everybody else. And this is not a regular table, so I'm not gonna have this primary key definitions in here. What I'm gonna have here is a definition. Oh, with it was already there. So let me get this primary key out of this script. And here in the with, what I do is I point to my external sources. So what I'm doing here is do a location, and my location will be my container, my database in my container. So my database, hold on, oops, right click. My database name is SQL Server 2020. Yeah, this is my database name. Let's get back there. You go in here, and my container name is Dean Customer. So let's get this guy from here. Paste it in here. So this is my source. I mean the ID for my source, and the location of this guy is this one here, SQL Server, SQL Saturday LA. So data source is this, SQL Saturday LA. So that should take care of it. Let's take a look. Execute. Cannot find nvarchar. If I can type, right? nvarchar. When you do it live, it's always like that. Always fun. There we go. Let's do it again. You didn't like a parenthesis somewhere. Line 14. Oh, there is an extra comma here. There we go. Execute. And well, now I got everything right, but something wrong about index path corresponding to specific order by is excluded. Something about the table structure. May have missed something in there, but I'm running out of time. I think it's gonna leave you with this one here, and you can search me or connect with me on LinkedIn later, and I give you the right script for all of these things. But that's what we're supposed to do. Once this is done, the next step here would be, create statistics on my table. You know the idea, right? Create statistics on my table and ask Polybase to go talk to Cosmos DB to understand how the data is distributed over there in whatever column I need to create statistics on, because I'm going to do queries on that one. And then is the happy selector, right? It's going to be select star from table one, inner join Cosmos DB customers. Customer on, and my join criteria, and that particular one would fly just fine with the statistics that had been collected before by SQL Server, and the more optimized query plan for this one would pop up, right? So that's how easy this thing can be. And you have connections for Azure SQL Database, for a bunch of other sources, Teradata, Hadoop still there, and everything else, right? Yeah, so before I switch back to the slide deck, did any question pop up? And I think I'm running out of time, right? So
Yes, so I actually have a question. So I noticed that you're defining the fields in there as not null, and given the nature of MongoDB and the fact that the field may not just be there at all, do we need to take that into consideration? Should
Oh,
they be
yes.
null or is not? Okay, because yeah,
Yes.
in my mind it would have been like all of them nullable, and then because almost with besides the ID, almost all of them may not be
You're
there,
right on
right?
point. You're right on point.
Um, okay.
The non-SQL is a schema-less, right? Is actually the schema is validated after the data is loaded. So the idea is load the data. So NoSQL works on that perspective.
Mm-hmm.
When you get into SQL Server, you're supposed to conform to the schema. So if you know that you may have attributes that won't be there, not null. I mean, null should be in the table structure. You are completely right.
So we're following all the standard rules. So, okay, I have another question here from our audience.
Oh,
Can this
nice. Well
connect to
done.
AWS RDS as well? So can this connect to RDS?
RDS, and RDS is Amazon services, right?
Amazon, yes, Amazon database as
SQL
service.
Server. I mean, could be SQL Server, right?
Could be
The
SQL
question
Server,
is,
yes.
it really does, I mean, the answer to the question is it doesn't matter who is hosting the service. If the service is supported, you can query, right? Because you're gonna have your URL to the service, you're gonna have a port in your credentials. So the computing power, or in what cloud or on-premise the service runs, is really not important, is irrelevant. So the answer is yes, could be in RDS or anywhere else, as long as we
Excellent.
have
And
good connectivity.
so let's see, do we have to manually update statistics over time?
Yes, because you don't have
Okay, that's
indexes.
good to know.
So you do have to update statistics over time.
So is this something that you would recommend having in the job and having it scheduled for a specific time that works for the business?
You see,
Is that the
that's
way
the
to do it?
beauty. That's the beauty of it, because that's how we do it today, right? We have our maintenance plans, and one of the things they do, they update statistics when they reindex, when they rebuild indexes, they update statistics. So that is something we already do. What must
Perfect.
be taken in consideration, though, is the cost of it, because it's going outside, it's probing the database, in the external database. So if you're, like, say, if your Cosmos DB is that big, you're gonna have a big RU consumption, because if you do a full probe, it's gonna read all the entire container, and that can be big on budget, right? Can be big on your pockets. So you may want to probe by samples. It all depends where your data is. So be mindful of the costs.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. I'm trying to see if there's anything else I missed. Uh,
All right. So
no,
while you look at that one, just to wrap it up, this is the last topic here, the big data cluster. And here's the thing that really blew my mind when I first look at it. It's how SQL Server changed internally when you go into big data clusters, also known as BDC. Uh, in SQL Server 2019, you have the opportunity to implement this. And this one here, all of this here, most of this thing actually is all on-premise. So what you have is, in the past, in the previous version, you have Hadoop, and you deal with Hadoop outside, and it's completely, parallel to SQL. SQL could do Polybase to Hadoop and would be parallel to SQL Server. But in SQL Server 2019, you can actually embed that inside SQL Server. So with Polybase and your Hadoop files or your nodes available to SQL Server, you can scale out Polybase, so you can have multiple Polybase nodes running, and you can use parallel Hadoop implementations, or you can use that inside Kubernetes deployments, inside pods in SQL Server. So the bottom line in here, to keep things simple, is you can have your big data in non-SQL format in Hadoop HDFS systems, and never see it. All your queries to those storages are done through a regular SQL Server Management Studio, and you see your tables like in regular selects. If this thing is on premises, even better. If it's in the clouds, be mindful of the costs, but you can completely transparent from Management Studio. And to go back to the point, this is not your daddy's database management system. On the first slide, I show you that SQL Server was about file groups and data files. So file groups and data files are just this little element in here, this SQL little load in here in SQL Server, where your data files is. Everything else that you can implement with BDC, there will be another session on BDC probably. It's added as ways you can store data in SQL Server, integrate all of them together, and be able to query that data from a single unique management tool. That could be Management Studio, could be ADF, Azure Data Tool, Azure Data Studio, right? ADS, Azure Data Studio, or any tool of your choice, because it's all through a regular SQL database engine. So this thing here really excites me when I think about what can be done and how companies can take advantage of this, right? And integrate all the data sources they have out there, non-SQL, big data, everything else. That's pretty cool. So that's the end of it. This last slide here is from Microsoft too. This one here is about some scenarios. So we're going to leave it there in the slide deck for people to take a look later. But it's a very popular slide, actually a graphic, right, from Microsoft. So any more questions I can help with?
No more questions here, except for will you be uploading your copy of your presentation to our site?
Yeah, in a few minutes.
Great. This is really excellent, and really, in my personal opinion, this is a game changer. And I really appreciate you doing this. It's a really great presentation for me because I really need to know this. This is great. And thank you for being a part of the first virtual SQL Saturday in LA.
Hey, thanks for having me. It was really fun, and especially because I can step out and go to my barbecue, back to my barbecue with my family. So that's pretty cool. I think the final message here is like, if you do have linked servers or open row set going around in your infrastructure, in your installation, you probably want to take a look on Polybase. You don't really have to go to BDC, but you probably want to take a look on Polybase to make your life easier and more scalable. Things will run faster.
Great. Thank you very much. And enjoy your barbecue.
Thank you. See you guys.
Thank you. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.